Have you ever made a promise you weren't sure you could keep? Have you ever stood at a crossroads where one road led to comfort and lies, and the other led to ruin and truth, and you had to choose? If you have, then this story was made for you. And if you haven't faced that moment yet, listen closely, because one day you will. There is a kind of pain that doesn't come from loss itself. It comes from the question that follows loss. The question that whispers in the dark long after everyone else has gone to sleep. Was I a fool for doing the right thing? That question can hollow a person out from the inside. It can make honesty feel like a curse and integrity feel like a chain around your neck. But today, I want to tell you about a man who asked that very question. A man who lost nearly everything and discovered something the rest of the world had forgotten. Stay with me until the very end, because what I am about to share with you will change the way you see trust, integrity, and the invisible thread that holds a human life together. The most important part of this story is waiting for you at the very end. There is a city in the foothills of a great mountain range where the mornings smell of cardamom and sawdust, and where the market square has hummed with life for more generations than anyone can count. The cobblestones are worn smooth from centuries of footsteps. The walls of the old buildings are the color of warm clay, streaked with the rust of old iron hinges and the faded green of climbing vines. In the early hours, before the sun has fully pulled itself above the peaks, the merchants arrive one by one, cartwheels grinding, lanterns swaying, the sound of wooden crates stacked upon wooden crates, filling the cool air like a quiet kind of music. In the eastern corner of this market, closest to the old fountain, there was a shop with a blue door. That door had been blue for 40 years. It had been painted blue by a man named Elias when he was 22 years old and newly married, and so full of hope that the color seemed to choose itself. Elias sold cloth, not the cheap, thin cloth that frays after a single washing. He sold the good cloth, the heavy linen from the northern valleys, the fine cotton that came in bolts wrapped in brown paper, the wool that kept its shape through 10 winters. He knew every weave by the touch of his fingers. He could tell you the origin of a thread the way a shepherd knows his flock. And Elias had a reputation. In that city, in that market, his name meant something very specific. It meant, what he says, he means. It meant, if Elias shakes your hand, no paper is needed. Merchants from 3 towns over would make the journey to buy from him simply because they knew they would not be cheated. Mothers sent their daughters to his shop because the cloth he called fine was truly fine. His word was, as the old people of that city said, heavier than coin. But Elias had a weakness he rarely admitted to himself. He was proud of this reputation, not in a vain way, not the pride that preens itself in a mirror. It was a quieter pride, the kind that settles into a man's bones and becomes part of how he stands, how he speaks, how he judges others. He believed, without quite saying it, that his integrity had earned him a kind of protection, that the universe, or fate, or God, whichever force arranged such things, would honor his honesty with security. He was about to find out how wrong he was. It began with a contract. A merchant from the capital city arrived one autumn with an offer that made Elias's hands go still when he read it. A government building was to be furnished curtains, upholstery, lining, for hundreds of rooms. The order was larger than anything Elias had handled in his life. Larger, in fact, than his entire current inventory. To fulfill it, he would need to borrow. He would need to purchase cloth on credit from his suppliers, hire extra hands, rent a warehouse across the river. He would need to promise delivery by the first day of winter, 60 days away. Elias looked at the contract for a long time. He thought about his wife, Mira, and their 2 children. He thought about the new roof they needed and the debt on the cart that had been repaired twice already. He thought about his reputation, and he felt certain that a man of his word could manage this. He could deliver on time. He always had. He signed. The first weeks were full of motion and energy. Bolts of cloth arrived daily. His small shop felt alive in a new way. Crowded, loud, purposeful. Mira helped him keep the accounts. His eldest child, a girl of 12, sorted fabric samples by color in the evenings. There was something almost joyful about it. But then, 20 days in, the rains came. Not ordinary autumn rains, the kind that come once in a generation. The mountain rivers swelled and broke their banks. The bridge to the warehouse across the river was swept away in a single night. Half of his stored inventory was ruined, not all of it, but enough. And worse, the roads that brought cloth from the northern valleys were flooded and impassable. Supplies could not reach him. Elias stood in the street, the morning after the floods, and looked at the brown water still running between the stones. He calculated in his head, even if the roads cleared in a week, even if he worked every hour of daylight, he could not fulfill the entire contract by the first day of winter. Not fully, perhaps 3/4 of it. Perhaps. He could hear, without anyone saying it aloud, the quiet voice that whispers to all of us in moments like this. No one needs to know yet. Wait and see. Maybe the roads will clear faster than expected. Maybe you can find another supplier. Maybe things will work out and you will never have to say the word you are dreading. Maybe silence is not the same as a lie. Podumaj, have you ever heard that voice? Have you ever stood in a moment where the truth felt like a door you could not afford to open? Elias heard it, and he stood there in the street for a long time. Then he walked inside, sat down at his writing table, and began a letter to the merchant in the capital. He wrote the truth, all of it. He explained the floods, the damage, what he could deliver and what he could not. He offered to return a portion of the advance payment. He made no excuses and asked for no sympathy. He simply said, "This is what is true, and I will not pretend otherwise." He sealed the letter and sent it that same afternoon. The reply came 12 days later. It was brief. The contract was canceled. The advance must be returned in full. And because the cancellation was now documented as a failure of delivery, other merchants in the capital would hear of it. Within a month, 2 of his longtime suppliers wrote to say they were extending credit no further. A merchant from the next town, who had referred customers to Elias for years, sent a polite but cold note saying he would be seeking other arrangements. And one morning, Elias arrived at the market to find that a new cloth merchant had taken the stall nearest the fountain. A young man with loud prices and a louder voice, who sold cloth that looked fine from a distance. Business slowed. Then it slowed further. There was a night in December when Mira sat across from Elias at their kitchen table with the account ledger open between them, and neither of them spoke for a very long time. The fire had burned low. Outside, the first snow of winter was falling, quiet and indifferent. Elias looked at the numbers on the page and felt something he had never quite felt before. Not fear exactly, but a kind of vertigo, as though the ground beneath everything he had built was no longer solid. He thought about the letter he had sent. He thought about how easy it would have been to wait, to hope, to say nothing until it was impossible to say nothing. Would the outcome have been so different? Perhaps the merchant would have extended the deadline. Perhaps not, but at least he would not have volunteered his own ruin. That was the night the question came, the question that hollows a person out. Was I a fool? He did not sleep that night. He lay in the dark and listened to the snow and wondered whether integrity was a virtue or simply a luxury that only the comfortable could afford. The next morning, he rose before dawn and walked to the market. The square was almost empty. The fountain was frozen. His breath made small clouds in the air. He sat on the stone bench near his blue door and watched the city wake up slowly, the way it always had, the way it would long after he was gone. An old man came and sat beside him. Elias knew him only slightly, a retired spice merchant named Solomon who sometimes walked the market in the mornings for no reason anyone could explain. He was a small man, very still, with the kind of face that had stopped being surprised by anything a long time ago. They sat in silence for a while. Then Solomon said, without looking at him, "I heard about the contract." Elias said nothing. Solomon said, "I also heard that you wrote the truth to them before anyone asked." Still, Elias said nothing. The old man was quiet for a moment. Then he said something that Elias would carry with him for the rest of his life. He said, "A tree that bends in the storm does not break, but the tree that cannot bend, the one that has grown too rigid, too certain of its own strength, that tree shatters. What holds a tree upright is not that it never moves. It is the depth of its roots." Elias looked at him. Solomon said, "You think your honesty cost you something. You are only seeing what has fallen. You cannot yet see what is still standing." Then the old man stood up, adjusted his coat, and walked away through the empty square without another word. Remember the question we began with today? Was I a fool for doing the right thing? Keep that question close, because what came next is where the answer lives. Elias sat on that bench for a long time after Solomon left. The sun came up slowly. The frost began to melt at the edges of the fountain. And he thought about roots. He thought about all the years he had built something invisible. Not inventory, not contracts, something else. Something that did not appear in any ledger. He thought about every handshake, every delivery that arrived as promised. Every time he had told a customer that a cloth was not what they needed and pointed them somewhere else, rather than make a sale he could not stand behind. He had been building something for 40 years, and he had not quite known what it was. That afternoon, a woman came to his shop. He did not know her well. She lived on the far side of the city and had come to him only twice before. She said, "I heard what happened. I heard you told the truth when you didn't have to. I want to buy my cloth from you from now on." 2 days later, a fabric supplier from a town to the south that Elias had never dealt with sent a letter. He had heard about the floods and the canceled contract. He had also, he wrote, heard how Elias had handled it. He was offering credit terms, generous ones, and wanted to know if Elias was interested in a long-term arrangement. A week after that, a builder who was furnishing a new inn came to the market looking for someone he could trust. 3 different people in the square pointed him to the blue door. None of these things made Elias rich again overnight. The recovery was slow. There were months that were still lean, but something had shifted quietly, without announcement. The way the seasons shift. Word had spread not of his failure, but of something rarer, of a man who had been ruined by telling the truth and had told it anyway. And here is what Elias came to understand. He understood it not as a lesson someone taught him, but as something he felt in his own chest one spring morning when he opened his blue door and looked out at the market square and felt, without quite being able to name it, that he was exactly who he was. That there was no version of himself hiding behind a different story. That he had nothing to defend. A tree that bends in the storm does not break. What holds it upright is the depth of its roots. That is what he had been building for 40 years. And the storm had not destroyed it. The storm had only shown him how deep the roots went. Now I want to speak to you directly. Not to Elias, to you. Maybe you have never been a merchant. Maybe your moment of choice looked nothing like his. Maybe it was a conversation at work where you could have shifted the blame and didn't. Maybe it was a relationship where you told the truth knowing it would cost you. Maybe it was a dream you refused to abandon even when everyone around you called it foolish. Maybe you are in that storm right now, standing in the street, looking at the floodwater, wondering whether the letter you are about to send is going to ruin you. I want you to hear this clearly. The world will not always reward your integrity immediately. Sometimes it will take everything from you first. That is not a malfunction. That is the nature of roots. Roots grow down before anything grows up. Here is what I hope you take from this story. First, honesty is not a transaction. It is not something you give in exchange for protection or reward. It is the ground you stand on, and you cannot stand on it only when it is convenient. Second, the things you build in invisible ways, your word, your consistency, your refusal to become someone else when the pressure is high. These are more durable than anything that can be destroyed by a flood or a canceled contract. Third, your reputation for truth will outlast your reputation for success. People forget your wins. They remember who you were when winning was not an option. A tree that bends in the storm does not break. What holds it upright is the depth of its roots. Now I want to ask you something, and I hope you will take a moment to answer not for me, but for yourself. Think of a time in your life when doing the right thing cost you something real. When honesty or integrity or simply refusing to become smaller than you are came with a price. And then think about what that moment gave you that you might not have seen at the time. I would love to hear your story in the comments. Write it there not because anyone is keeping score, but because your story might be the thing that helps someone else decide to send their own letter. If you know someone right now who is standing in that street, looking at the floodwater, wondering whether to tell the truth, send them this story. Not with a message, not with advice, just send it. Let it speak for them, what they cannot yet say for themselves. And if these stories speak to something in you, if you come here to be reminded of who you are and who you are capable of becoming, then stay close. Every story shared here is made for one reason, to remind you that you are not alone, that your struggle has been walked before, and that the roots you are growing right now, even in the hardest seasons, are preparing you for something you cannot yet see.